The following Q&A is from a session with Dr. Salla, originally held on April 22, 2023. It is informative and relevant to the events currently happening in the world today, worthy of a second look.
Welcome, aloha, howdy all, g'day. So I'm very glad that you could join me today for our Q&A. I'm going to now turn it over to Angelica, who is going to relay your questions to me.
Thank you so much, Michael. And now we're going to go to our first question, which comes from Darren Swink. And Darren asks, Dr. Salla, first hello from Colorado. How long before the space arcs start appearing in our skies?
Well, that's a really interesting question, Derek. I think we need to ask ourselves, what would happen if the space arcs suddenly appeared right now in the sky? Because the deep state is still in a position of authority, still has a lot of assets that it could use, it could deploy its assets to create a scenario of the Earth being under some kind of attack. And so I think that the space arcs, that they are releasing probes to kind of monitor human consciousness, and they can measure where we're at in terms of our consciousness. So they will reveal themselves at a time when it's going to be advantageous to humanity in terms of what's next for us. I think the space arcs in the past have appeared just before a global cataclysm to rescue people and take them off planet for a certain period of time. Now, we're not going to go through a global cataclysm because, as I said, the militaries of all of the major nations are cooperating under a unified space command led by, as I mentioned, James Dickinson, the head of US Space Command, and they are all collaborating. So even though on the Earth itself it seems that, well, you know, war in Ukraine, could war happen in Taiwan, could war erupt in Syria or some other place, that all of these things aren't really going to happen. So the space arcs have some kind of organic consciousness, and they can understand that at the moment the Earth is going through some kind of major transition in terms of our population, you know, what we accept as reality and not. And so they will reveal themselves once we've gone through that process, because there's no urgency to do so at this time. But I think there is a countdown or a time factor involved here that this is driving events to a certain extent, why it is that the deep state is doing the things it's doing. Why did the deep state employ its assets to suddenly get people talking about motherships releasing probes that are now being that are probably related to these UFOs that are being shot down? I think it's because they want to poison the well. They want people to think that these Arks or extraterrestrial motherships are the enemy. So they're not going to reveal themselves until the time is right. And I think that's going to require for this show, this global show, to be over, because the show is going to come to an end at some point. Because absolutely the biggest priority for the top-ranking generals from Russia, China, United States, France, Britain, all of these guys, Australia, these guys that are fully apprised of the true situation on our planet, understand that the big issues confronting our planet are preventing the Draconians, the Orion Grace from coming back, getting control of the space arcs, the ancient technologies, the builder race technologies that are being found all over the place, and work with the contactees, the intuitives, to understand these technologies and how they can be used for the benefit of all humanity. So that is happening behind the scenes. So this show has to play its course, and then I think the space arcs will appear.
Okay, our next question comes from Ava. Hi, Dr. Salla. The ant people are preparing to reveal themselves to the public and to invite Terrans to contact them, as JP said. Will this take place only in the US or around the world? Thank you so much for your research and teachings.
Excellent question. Now, the ant people, as well as underground civilizations all over the world, they are in the process of revealing themselves to more and more people that are ready for that. So those of you who are intuitive, who are open, the opportunity may come for you to be exposed to these beings, whether it's physically or through dreams or some kind of out-of-body experience. All of these things are part of the process. And often it happens like that there's telepathic contact, some dreams, out-of-body experiences, and then you have the full-blown physical contact. Because the ant people, the inner Earth civilizations know that our planet is going through some kind of major transition. And they know that while there appears to be chaos on the surface of our planet and the possibility of nuclear war, that's not real, that's some kind of show designed that has a specific shelf life. And so they are in the process of revealing themselves. So it's going to be all over the planet because the ant people are the oldest, probably according to the Sasquatch message, it talked about the ant people being the very first civilization on planet Earth. So they go back hundreds of thousands, millions of years, very ancient race of beings. So they are on Earth. So they are preparing people who are ready for some kind of encounter. So JP has talked about that. That it's not just the ant people. There is also the Radu Cinema material, the Transylvania Sunrise series of books that also talk about the inner Earth civilizations interacting more with surface humanity. And there are many, many people out there that are talking about contact with the inner Earth civilization. So that is very much a process that is underway. But again, you're not going to have full-blown access or revelations until the deep state is removed, because the deep state is still a dangerous entity. It has to be removed from power before all of these things can be revealed. Otherwise, the deep state will use it to contrive chaos, and that's their whole purpose, is to create chaos. And out of that chaos, they create this Hegelian dialectic, where out of the chaos they come up with a new order, and that's how they perpetuate their power. So the Earth Alliance are working with the positive extraterrestrials to make sure that that doesn't happen, that the deep state, rather than create chaos out of which they get more power, that the deep state is exposed and removed from all positions of power.
And now we are still having some issues with my microphone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to project my voice so I can be heard via Michael's microphone. And we'll take it this way and see if this will sort out our sound issues. All right. So this question is from Lena. Have the Aztec Indians told what they have seen during their missing weeks in the space ark?
Well, with the Aztec Indians, what JP described was that they were missing for several weeks, and when the rescue mission was sent, involving the Russians, the Chinese, and the US, the Aztecs were there, and he believed that they had spent time in an underground civilization, that they weren't at the space ark all that time. And later on, when JP visited one of the kingdoms of the ant people, the one involving the king of the ant people, he said that that's when he believed, or was given information, that's where the ant people spent their time from the space ark, that they traveled from the space ark to that ant civilization outpost and then went back. So JP so far has described 3 different underground civilizations, all in Florida, where there is an ant city or colony, and each is run separately and they have their own ruler or a king. But yeah, he thinks that the Aztec Indians spent their time there, and JP described how the how the ant people have long been giving sanctuary to surface humans under a variety of circumstances. So for them to give protection or to give or to accommodate these Aztec Indians for several weeks, wouldn't have been a problem at all.
Our next question is from BB. I would love it if you could elaborate more on the Mohammedan Accords, aka the deal the reptilians made with the Arab world that you briefly mentioned in one of your webinar podcast episodes. Thank you.
Well, that's a very important question, actually. I'm glad you raised that. Thank you. The Mohammedan Accords have been referred to by several people, and what they describe is a set of agreements whereby the Draco reptilians negotiated a deal where, in return for the extraterrestrials not openly revealing themselves anymore, that a certain number of people would be handed over to the Draconians for sports, for sacrifice. So, and part of the agreement was that humanity would be allowed to evolve without extraterrestrials openly interacting and moving around. That the extraterrestrials would now just operate exclusively behind the scenes, because up until that time, there were still many parts of the world where the extraterrestrials openly interacted with humanity. So there's been a process whereby slowly human civilizations have moved from one where you have the gods openly interacting with humanity, and this is, we go to the Greek gods, the Roman gods, the Egyptian gods, the Hindu gods, where they openly interacted with humanity. But under the Mohammedan Accords, all of that was placed on the back burner. It was decided that humanity would be given space to evolve itself, because it was understood that as long as humanity had to deal with these gods or these superior, physically, mentally, spiritually superior extraterrestrials that were openly interacting with humanity, that our evolution would be stunted in a way. So those were the agreements that were reached. And I think what we have now is a scenario where humanity has reached a kind of level of maturity, politically, economically, socially, where we can now welcome back extraterrestrials, where they can openly interact with us, and we won't worship them as gods, that we won't be overwhelmed by them, that we can actually deal with 20-foot tall extraterrestrials or giants interacting with us, and we're not going to give all our power away to them. We'll just say, wow, incredible, but we've kind of evolved to the point where we're not going to just surrender our power. We now can deal with these beings, even though they technologically or physically, emotionally have superior abilities. We will still deal with them as equals, because we have been kind of like thoroughly indoctrinated over the course of more than 1,000 years now, where we feel that we are worthy, we choose our own destiny. Democracy has taken root in most developed nations, where it's one man, one vote, or where it doesn't matter how wealthy you are or how well connected you are, your vote is as equal to mine. So we have been indoctrinated with egalitarian values, so we will not give our power away, even though it's going to be quite a challenge because many of these extraterrestrials, especially the Anunnaki scientists that are waking up with all of this incredible wisdom and knowledge, that's going to be awesome in terms of how we can move forward as a society. But I think the people who will be interacting with the Anunnaki scientists that wake up, or the sleeping giants that wake up, that have all of this incredible knowledge, I think those individuals will be able to do it in a way where human dignity is preserved, where we don't give our power away to them, but we kind of like look at them as like wise elders, beings who can help us evolve as a civilization, but not develop an unequal society.
Our next question comes from Lenka from France. Hi, Dr. Salla. My question is, why and to what extent is ancestral lineage important? Are we forever bound to ancestral lineage, or can we set ourselves free from that? Or does it go deeper? The main reason why I bring this up is that I feel there is a big buzz about bloodlines, lineages, DNA, etc. You speak of it, Elena Denon, too, John Charles Moyen also. And from what I understand, it would seem that your ancestral lineage plays an important role, to the point that depending on which ancestral lineage one is from, you have many privileges. For example, you have the right DNA to open portals or space arcs, teleport instantly without having done any personal work on that specific topic, or being allowed to communicate with people on other planets. The list goes on. Having said that, I strongly feel there's a webinar to do on this topic. Many speak of what lineage they are from, but never explain the intricacy of this particular subject. Could you please comment?
Okay, well, thank you for that question, Lenka. That's a lot of information in there. So the important thing to keep in mind is that it's the soul that inhabits the physical body that is critical for who has access to a space ark or some of these ancient builder race technologies. The ancestral connection is something that's more pertinent to the deep state, because for them, it's all about ancestral lineage, and it's all about bloodline families. And so you have, Fritz Springmeier has talked about the 13 bloodline families. So for those that come from the reptilian or from the kind of like deep state background, it's all about ancestral connections. And so for them, this is a very important issue, because they believe that this gives them kind of like a lot of legitimacy or right to be in control of our planet, the divine right of kings. I mean, the deep state truly believe in the doctrine of the divine right of kings. And so if you can trace your ancestry back to the Nebuchadnezzar or King Sargon or Queen Victoria or whatever it is, whatever ruler that you want to designate as your bloodline family ancestral connection, then you can ascribe to yourself that, yes, we control this population because of our ancestral connection. So I think that's why it is a very relevant thing even now. I mean, you have King Charles in England, and his ancestral connection becomes important in terms of him making decisions and being responsible for the British Isles, or even what remains of the British Commonwealth. So that's one side, the ancestral connection, very important for the people on the deep state side of things. As far as those that are more connected to the Earth Alliance or to the positive extraterrestrial groups, we come in with a soul frequency from other planets as star seeds, and we look for compatible physical vehicles or unions. So we'll see a man and before incarnating, a choice is made that we're going to incarnate with a particular family, and that family is chosen for a number of factors. I mean, their genetics is an important one. There could be an ancestral element in that, but the more important thing is the genetics and the consciousness, because ultimately, when it comes to the activation of space arcs, it's not so much your ancestry and how far back you can connect your DNA to, like King Sargon or Nebuchadnezzar or some ancient Atlantean king, god king, or whatever. It's more about your DNA consciousness right now. That's what's important for activating these advanced technologies. And so the star seeds choose to incarnate in particular human families because that family has the right mix of genetics. So some of those genetics might be more suitable for, say, the Pleiadian space arcs. Some genetics might be more suitable for the Sirian space arcs. Some genetics might be more suitable for an Arcturian space arc, because the space arcs, they're not monolithic. I mean, a number of sources, Elena, the Only Planet of Choice, Phyllis Schlemmer, and others have talked about 24 different extraterrestrial cedar races. Alex has talked about 22 different genetic experiments. So we're talking roughly 24 different extraterrestrial civilizations that have been responsible for these human experiments on Earth, where you create an Adam and Eve, you protect that Garden Eden experiment, watch it grow, watch it expand, get control over a certain territory, and then another extraterrestrial group will create their own Adam and Eve in another territory and watch that and nurture that and let that grow. And then eventually you have all these Adam and Eve experiments, kind of like multiple ET groups interacting, some triumphing over the others, some waning. But you have these space arcs there that are there to preserve that experiment during times of cataclysm. So each of these space arcs will belong to a particular extraterrestrial civilization, one of the cedar races, and the extraterrestrial groups they work with, because that's an important qualification, that the Pleiadians, the Sirians, they're from our galaxy, but the cedars are from another galaxy, but they work with the extraterrestrials from our galaxy as well. So the cedars actually have this intra-galactic authority because they implement genetic experiments or Eden type experiments all over the galaxies, but they also enlist human civilizations in those galaxies in their genetic experiments. So the cedars will come along and say, okay, they'll work with the Pleiadians and they'll create a kind of like a Pleiadian genetic experiment on Earth. So when it comes to the right DNA consciousness, starseeds will choose which family they incarnate into, because that choice will endow them, will endow the physical body with the right genetics, so that the consciousness, which is now fully incarnated in that body, can interact with these space arcs or the builder race technologies, whatever it is that's necessary. So this is why the deep state are so anxious to get control of starseeds, get control of them, because they themselves cannot access the they cannot access the space arcs. Those with just the pure ancestral lineage, or that they are connected to the Draco, Orion empires, they have no real connection to these space arcs. So they have to get starseeds that have been incarnated and kind of manipulate and trick them so that they can get access to the space arcs. So hopefully that answers that question.
Our next question comes from Bibi, who would like to know your take on the flat Earth theory and its origins, and whether it started out as a deliberate disinformation campaign by the deep state.
Okay, the flat Earth theory, very, very interesting. I've always been very skeptical of that, never really gave it much currency, and thought it was just a CIA psyop designed by someone who wanted to see whether or not they could fool a lot of people. But with further reflection and study, I found a really compelling explanation in, I think it was book 3 of the Transylvania Sunrise book series by Radu Cinema. And he explained the flat Earth theory, and I think it actually makes a lot of sense. The flat Earth theory is designed for souls that are not ready to transition into a galactic society. That there are souls who still want to experience 3D reality as it is today, that they don't want things to change. And in fact, that the flat Earth theory is a way for them to kind of like maintain the current 3D reality. They want nothing to do with the Star Trek future. They want nothing to do with interaction with galactics. So they are creating they've accepted a philosophy, this flat Earth theory, which will eventually lead to them being displaced and removed to another planet where they continue the 3D reality. And to me, that makes a lot of sense, because it's all about a free will choice. If you don't want anything to do with this kind of whole galactic society, extraterrestrials walking amongst us, and giants, and super soldiers, and for a lot of people, that's scary because they're not starseeds. For the starseeds amongst us, and I'm sure many of you watching this are starseeds, you look forward to becoming a part of the galactic civilization. For those that don't have that starseed heritage, that are still new to 3D reality, Earth may be their first incarnational plane of existence, it is one damn scary scenario. They don't want nothing to do with it. So the flat Earth theory actually is a convenient way for them to express their free will choice, that we want nothing to do with this Star Trek future. We want to just continue things as they are. We like the 3D reality, and that will enable them to be taken to another Earth that will allow them to kind of like play out the 3D reality as they want it to be, where it's just, there's nothing beyond the Earth other than just what you see with your eyes, ears, and feel and touch, and that'll be their new reality. And so, yes, I think ultimately it comes down to a free will choice.
Our next question comes from Robert, who says, "Hi, Dr. Salla. Thanks for all that you do. In many of your interviews with people that have spent time on Mars, there seems to be a variety of stories about the real environment on Mars. How many humans are currently living there, and will they have equal rights with the other beings in the future? Are there animals and vegetation?"
Well, I think what we've been told about Mars in terms of the surface being totally inhospitable to life, and that I think the statistic is something like 95% of the atmosphere of Mars is carbon dioxide, which would be deadly for humans. You couldn't survive with that level. I mean, Earth only has a kind of microscopic amount of carbon dioxide, less than 1%. It's a trace amount. What we know from the many people that have described being on the surface of Mars, that the surface of Mars is similar to the atmosphere and the temperature of an elevation of like 10,000 feet. So the atmospheric pressure is less, but you can still breathe, but there's not as much oxygen in the atmosphere. And certainly that would tell us that there's nowhere near that kind of level of carbon dioxide there in the atmosphere. Now, as for the different stories about what's happening on the surface of Mars, yeah, there are many, many stories, and they do, to a certain degree, conflict with one another. But some of the things that I think we can see as being the common denominator is that there is vegetation on Mars, there is animal life on Mars, that there are predators on Mars, and obviously, if you have predators, that means that you have a sufficient number of prey for those predators to survive on Mars. That you have indigenous species on Mars, and that there are human settlers on Mars. And at various times, there have been conflicts between the human settlers, beginning in the 1940s and 50s with the German colonies that were first established on Mars, and then later on the US and others came in and expanded those bases, and then you had corporations coming in. That there have been ongoing conflicts with the indigenous peoples. More recently, we've had communications that the indigenous peoples on Mars were helped by the Galactic Federation to achieve liberation. And so that led to these bases on Mars that had been formerly under the control of the interplanetary corporate conglomerate, or a corporate space outfit, them losing control. So something similar to the movie series in Avatar, where again you have a corporation losing control of a base on Mars. So a base on this planet, I forgot the name of it, but something similar happening on Mars. So I think we have something like that having happened. Now, if we get into the specifics, like how many people are still on Mars or were on Mars or shipped out, that's where we're going to get wildly diverging numbers, because so many people have shared different kind of estimates and stories. Some have shared several million on Mars and the colonists. But then there have been recent wars, the planetary liberation. Many people have been resettled, apparently, on Earth. So, yeah, the specifics are where we're going to get a lot of variation. But the common denominator is that there have been human settlements on Mars and bases on Mars, and that the Mars surface is habitable to a certain extent for human and animal life.
Our next question comes from Layla. Regarding the giant in cryosleep in the halls of Amente and other giants you have mentioned, what are your thoughts on their origins? Are they all Anunnaki? How does this correlate with mythology? Thank you.
It's very interesting. I mean, the stories of giants in stasis chambers. I mean, I know that there is the emerald tablets that discuss Thoth actually going into the halls of Amenti and him going into a stasis chamber, and that at a certain time he would come back. So we have that information. Then we also have information coming from a number of others discussing the Anunnaki scientists that have gone into stasis chambers when the war, or when the conflict between the Enki faction of the Anunnaki and the Enlil faction of the Anunnaki led to the Great Flood, the destruction of Atlantis, and Enki, or Prince Ea, that's his correct name, that's his real name, because Enki is actually a title for ruler of Earth. When Prince Ea left, the communications that Elena Danaan received was that 12 leading Anunnaki scientists chose to remain on Earth in stasis chambers. And they would ride out the succeeding millennia, and then they would awaken. But in this succeeding millennia, their consciousness would transfer from that stasis chamber where their body, their giant body, is being hosted, and they would reincarnate on Earth, or their soul consciousness would incarnate on Earth, gathering experience, intelligence, and so forth. And the Emerald Tablets said the same thing about Thoth when he went into the stasis chambers in the halls of the Menti, that his consciousness would incarnate amongst humans. So I think that those are some of the sources that describe giants on Earth. I think there are many other sources. I think one of the examples I gave was this giant from Slovenia, Good King Matthias. Good King Matthias was a giant as well, and he's up there in one of the mountains, dormant with he's in a stasis chamber, or he's sleeping with his warriors, with his army, and this was something that JP got from his sources, from the military, saying that there was a giant in a stasis chamber in Slovenia and a giant in a stasis chamber in Iraq, or in the city of Nippur, which was the former space command of the Anunnaki space fleet. And that giant, or that Anunnaki scientist, is none other than Aruna, who was the chief engineer for the Anunnaki space fleet. He was working with Enlil. He was the Enlil's leading space scientist. But he defected to the Enki faction, just as Marduk defected from the Enki faction to the Enlil faction, because Marduk was the son of Ea, or Enki, whereas Aruna was the son of Enlil. So with the Anunnaki, these kind of factions, they're very fluid. People will move from one to the other all the time, depending on wherever their loyalties lie, whatever they feel is the right thing to do. So there are good giants, or these giants with vast knowledge that are in stasis chambers, that are in different stages of waking up. And the giant in Florida, that was identified by Thorhan Aretian as Ningish Zida. And when we did the studies, or when we did the kind of we looked up who Ningish Zida was, it matched what JP said was in that base where Ningish Zida's stasis chambers was. There was a kind of tree that looked like the tree of life, these plants that involved in rejuvenation, and that all matched the title of Ningish Zida, who was known as the god of the good tree, the tree of life, if you like. So yes, there are these Anunnaki scientists that are in different stages of waking up. There are many other giants as well. Not all giants are positive. Some of them are negative. I mean, you have a lot of evangelical Christians, Steve Quayle, Tom Horn, Thomas Alberino, talking about, Tim Alberino talking about the negative giants. So yeah, there's a lot of data on those guys as well. So just as humans can have positive and negative factions, and the Anunnaki have positive and negative factions, similarly with giants. Why would it be otherwise? Next question.
Our next question comes from Bibi. Could you please talk a bit about ley lines, geomancy, and how we can take advantage of living near a node in terms of spiritual awakening, or if it has any effect at all? Thank you.
Right. Well, that's a very important question. Ley lines, living near a node. I mean, these are very important for understanding how advanced technologies or how portals operate. Advanced technologies or space-time portals, these are optimized in terms of where they are positioned vis-a-vis ley lines or the planetary energy grid. The best analogy I can think of is acupuncture, how the body has all these acupuncture pressure points, and depending on one acupuncture pressure point or another, you can bring about certain effects on the body. promoting health, or the opposite if you want. So I think the same thing happens. With acupuncture, by activating different pressure points, what you're doing is you're directing or redirecting energies, presumably to bring about health, but it could also be done for the other thing. But you know how to channel energies around the body to optimize the body's performance. So I think the Earth is the same. That the ley lines correspond to the same thing as acupuncture grid, or the way in which the body has a grid, and that knowledge of those acupuncture points is necessary for being able to move energy around. So similarly with ley lines and energy grids and sacred sites on the earth, the more you know about these and how they function, the more you can move energy. So how to activate a space portal, how to move from one part of the earth to another part of the earth using space portals safely. I mean, if any one of us now were to walk through a space portal, we come out the other side, initially we'd be like, wow, incredible. And then it dawns on us, how am I going to get back? You don't know how to do it. When you have that knowledge, you know how to move around the space-time portal grid on Earth and our solar system. So this is where knowledge of these things become important. And that's where I think these Anunnaki scientists, Thoth, Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, all of these giants that have this knowledge, have this information, they're going to be very important for bringing that information back to us. And the big picture is that Space Command and the United Militaries on Earth that are all collaborating to optimize our planet's ability to be able to be in control of our solar system. There's going to be an eagerness for that information to come out. But the Anunnaki are going to work with the people with the right soul consciousness and DNA to be able to do these things. So I think it's going to be an incredible time as all these beings awaken, and we are taught again how to, whether it's to pilot a space ark, whether it's to become a pilot on one of the extraterrestrial civilizations' space fleets, or whether it's to be able to navigate through the space-time portals. These are the things that lie ahead of us.
And our next question comes from BB. Alex Collier refers to Nibiru as a planet in his podcast episode. Elena Dinan says it's a spaceship based on direct contact. You have said in one of your webinars that it could possibly be either or both. I was wondering if you've managed to establish which one is the case. Thank you.
Well, very interesting question. I know that Zecharia Sitchin was probably the one that originally put out that information that Nibiru was a planet. Now, of course, he interpreted the Sumerian texts for that, and I think it's a reasonable assumption to make that to make that conclusion that Nibiru was a planet. So, and of course, there have been a lot of scholars and a lot of people that talk about Nibiru being a planet coming back every 3,600 years and causing catastrophe and so forth. That's been around for quite some time. Now, Elena Danan has said unequivocally that Nibiru is a spacecraft. Now, could Nibiru be a planetoid, a hollowed-out planetoid that is therefore both a planet and a spacecraft? I mean, that's the obvious solution here, that it's both. That Nibiru is a hollowed-out planet that is used by the Anunnaki for various purposes, and it was used as a laboratory for creating the first genetically engineered human prototypes, Adam and Eve, or Adapa, and so forth. So to me, that probably makes the most sense, that Nibiru, and Alex has talked about that quite a bit, actually, that you actually have, that's been the preferred way in which the galactics have operated is, rather than build a giant spacecraft from scratch, is that you start off with the moon and you just hollow it out and build it up. And so there you have a planetoid that's a spacecraft. So yeah, I don't think the answer has to be mutually exclusive. It can be both.
Alex A. in LA. In your recent interview with remote viewer Dick Elgire about the Atlantic Space Ark, he mentioned that he and his team were doing remote viewing on the progress of the collapse of the US dollar and how the new quantum financial system is being rolled out. Will you do another interview with him to find out about their findings?
Well, the financial changes, or the international financial system, is not something that I'm an expert in. Dick Algai has been working on that for longer than I, but I know he's also said that he's no financial consultant. But I know he's been getting some interesting data and results about the future of cryptocurrency, and he feels that this is going to be an important part of the future financial system that is coming. I know a lot of people have been saying gold and silver, and that's something we've taken to heart. We've kind of like protected ourselves through those kinds of investments. But I think that some kind of financial collapse is going to happen. I don't think it's going to be as bad as some people predict, but I think it's going to be bad enough that a lot of people that are kind of like, as I said, on the left side of the political system, support the Biden administration, that those people would be red-pilled and will say, wow, this administration has really mismanaged things, that all of a sudden our pension plan or a superannuation plan, 401k plan, is worth a quarter of what it once was. So it's not Trump's fault. It's not the Russians' fault. It's Biden's fault. So that's where I think you're going to have a lot of people getting red-pilled because of this kind of financial collapse. But I don't think that the white hats, the Earth Alliance, will allow it to become so bad that you're going to have runaway hyperinflation that you've had, in other countries throughout recent histories, that Americans will be starving on the streets and fighting over scraps. I don't think they'll allow it to get that bad. As I said, to me, this is a show, and they'll let the show run its course to get bad enough so that it red pills people, but not that bad that America or the global financial system will completely collapse.
Our next question comes from Mel. In Forgotten Genesis, Apellos told Radu that Tenacity was the father of mankind. Do you think he referred to Prince Ea?
Yes, I think that when he was talking about Tenacity and as the father of mankind, I do think he was talking about Prince Ea. The way he described him, this father of mankind, pretty much matches what the Sumerian records tell us about Ea, or Enki, that Enki was given the authority by the assembly of the Anunnaki gods to create humans who would replace the Igigi, who were the Anunnaki workers who were mining the gold in Africa and elsewhere, and that was one of the purposes of the creation of humans. And then, of course, you get one faction, which was the Enlil faction. They didn't want humans to be anything more than just workers who would mine the gold for the Anunnaki. Whereas Enki, or Ea, and Ninhursag, who was his female consort companion, they kind of fell in love with their human experiment, and they wanted to improve it. And so they gave humans the sacred knowledge, and I guess they gave humans the ability to have a Kundalini activation, where the serpent knowledge would rise up, and of course this infuriated Enlil, because he didn't want humans to be awakened, wise beings that would challenge the Anunnaki hold on things, because the same thing had happened with the Igigi that had become a problem for Enlil and for the mining of the gold. So he didn't want humans to go through the same process. So yeah, bottom line, I think that that's very likely that Tenacity, as mentioned in the by Radu Cinema, is the same as Enki.
Phoebe would like to know your take on the hollow moon theory and the moon's origins based on your research.
Okay, well, the hollow moon theory, I think that is, again, accurate. There are many moons in our solar system that have been hollowed out and used by different extraterrestrials throughout the history of our solar system, that the moon was placed there by particular extraterrestrial groups to kind of monitor the Earth's development. They developed bases on the far side of the moon and in the interior of the moon. There's stories about the moon being an ancient refugee ship that carried survivors from the Maldekian planet that was in the asteroid belt. So the moon definitely, I think, has this history of being a hollowed out planetoid. And in the 1970s, there was an experiment by the Russian space program, or the Soviet space program, where they, and I think one of the Apollo missions did the same thing, where they launched a projectile at the moon, and it hit the surface of the moon, and it resonated like a bell. Frequency was characteristic of a bell. So that, again, was just more data that the moon is hollowed out. And very interesting, you have a movie that just came out called Moonfall last year. And in my interview coming up with John D'Souza on Thursday, he gets to talk about why he thinks that this kind of moonfall is soft disclosure for a false flag operation that they're going to move forward with involving the moon. So that'll be very interesting to see how they spin this.
Our next question comes from Phoebe. I would also like to know your take on the Black Knight satellite and/or any info from your ET contactee colleagues.
Okay, well, the Black Knight satellite, that has been traced back to the early pre-satellite days, where there were reports of some object in Earth orbit that was a satellite or something. So this was before Sputnik. And so there were already people talking about that. I remember there was a book by Major Kehoe, and it was called the UFO Conspiracy, as I recall it. And he talked about a satellite or a mothership up there. So this was before Sputnik. So the Black Knight satellite goes back to that kind of pre-satellite era where people observed it. And I think even Tesla talked about some kind of object in Earth orbit. And to me, it makes a lot of sense that one or more extraterrestrial groups placed objects in orbit around the Earth to kind of get more data. Now, the moon itself is one major satellite that gains a lot of data on the Earth, but some extraterrestrial civilization decided to place a satellite, and that's been called the Black Knight satellite ever since.
And Phoebe writes, based on your research, what do you think happened after NASA's first moon landing? How does that tie in with the fact that anti-gravity tech already had been around by then? Was that a limited hangout? And why did they keep going back? And why did they suddenly stop? Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. William Tompkins wrote quite a bit about the NOVA program, the NOVA space program, that the Apollo or the Saturn V rocket that was designed for the Apollo missions. I mean, that could, I recall, it could carry, I think, its maximum payload, I think, was about 150 tons. But there was that, but that was the first stage of the NOVA program. That the Apollo program was, according to Bill Tompkins, was one stage of a more ambitious Navy program that aimed to establish permanent bases on the moon. They were going to use more powerful rockets called the Nova rockets, and this is a fact that there was a Nova rocket that was going to be able to carry much more than 150 tons into space. And this was going to be where they establish military bases on the moon. And then they would have continued the NOVA program, building these powerful rocket ships with big payloads to go to Mars and asteroid belt and so forth. And then once they had established facilities there, then they were going to start rolling out the anti-gravity technology. So that was the space program. That was the Navy's plan. And he described the 4-stage plan involving these Nova rockets and the transition to anti-gravity. But what happened was that when the Apollo program was sent to the moon, the Draconians and the Orion Greys put a stop to the Navy's program. They said, no, you cannot send your stuff up here. We're not going to allow it. So the Navy was not allowed to establish its own permanent manned bases on the moon. It had to work through the Dark Fleet and the agreements that the Dark Fleet had reached with the Draconians and the Orion Greys, that they weren't going to allow the Navy up there doing its own thing. So that's why the Apollo program came to an end, because it's true that NASA was warned off, but really what was really happening was that the Draconians and the Orions up the Greys and the Dark Fleet said, no, we don't want the Navy establishing permanent manned bases on the moon as part of an ambitious multi-stage space exploration program. We're not going to allow it.
Layla writes, what does your research indicate made gold such a valuable resource to the Anunnaki? What do you think the other most valuable minerals or resources are to ETs? Red mercury, obsidian? Thank you.
Well, with gold, I know that the Anunnaki, they are able to refine gold and to create monatomic gold, and that they ingest the monatomic gold in some way that preserves or extends their life to incredible periods. So I know, for example, Enki or Prince Ea, that he can live for approximately 30,000 years through the ingestion of monatomic gold before his consciousness gets transferred into a new clone. So that is why monatomic gold is so important for the Anunnaki. It also heightens one's psychic abilities, mental abilities. So this is why it is something that is highly valuable to them, why they go to great efforts to mine gold and have it used for the creation of monatomic gold. Other metals have various uses, but I think the monatomic gold is the one that's been identified as critical for the Anunnaki to be able to extend their lifespans and to be able to bring out their optimal abilities and to continue to play the role that they do in terms of having this extraordinary, we're talking many millennia of experiences and memories and knowledge that they can use to maintain their primacy or to maintain their kind of like powerful role in this kind of 3D, 4D reality. And when it comes to 5D, 6D, I don't believe the Anunnaki have much of an influence there. But as far as 3D, 4D reality is concerned, the Anunnaki have a lot of influence.
Klaus B. writes, how can we best prepare ourselves to collaborate with the Galactic Federation or the Earth Alliance? It feels like we just have to sit back and wait for others to take on the deep state rather than being able to have a direct impact on Earth's liberation.
Well, actually, you are having a direct impact on Earth's liberation, because remember, the Arks and the motherships are sending probes, because what they're doing is they're monitoring the planetary consciousness. And when you have a very clear vision of where you want to go or where you want the planet to go, and your vision resonates with millions of others, that is picked up by the probe. And that has tremendous importance, because, you are more aware of the big picture. And so your opinion carries more weight, whereas people who are still in denial about the whole extraterrestrial phenomenon, that have not developed any kind of viewpoint other than, well, this is scary stuff, I don't know what's going on. And then, those people, their opinion in terms of the measuring the planetary consciousness doesn't have much weight. But the more educated you become, the more active you become in sharing your information, telling others, the connections you establish with others, the networks you establish, whether it's with your family or with your work colleagues or with your friends, in sharing this information, you're creating a wave of energy that is being picked up by these sensitive instruments that the galactics have, that the arcs have. So that does have an influence. And that influence is then fed back to the Earth Alliance, because the Earth Alliance is then told, you've got to do things in a certain way because this is where your population is heading. And so that influences the big picture. So yes, just being aware, educating yourself, sharing that information with others does have an important impact.
So this will be our final question, and it will be our 35th question. So I think that's pretty good for 2 hours that you have answered 35 questions, Michael. All right. So our last question comes from Linda. Are there still reptilians and greys underground in Mount Shasta, California, or have they been removed?
Reptilians and greys in Mount Shasta, California. I honestly haven't heard that much about that. I mean, there have been rumors of that. I haven't been able to confirm that. I can just say from my experiences, when I've been to Mount Shasta several times, that I always felt a very positive vibe from there. To me, it was a really beautiful, mystical experience. I saw cloud ships there. I never got a negative vibe from that. I mean, when I was in Hawaii living there, and we would sometimes drive through Saddle Road, and there would be lenticular formations there in Saddle Road. We got the hit that these were greys, that these were Orions, that they had a presence there in Mauna Kea, in Saddle Road. But I never got that with Mount Shasta. So, I really don't know too much about the Orions, greys, and the Draconians being at Mount Shasta. But certainly I think that Mount Shasta is a very powerful energy center on the planet, and that whatever energies are there would have clearly have been a target for the deep state and for the negative extraterrestrials. So it's not, it would make sense that they would have tried to establish a presence there, but because it's such an important portal for the whole planet, the positive forces, I think, would have been able to flush that out quite clearly.
I would add that we know several groups associated with Mission Rama who work with the Galactic Confederation, and they have had just beautiful experiences out there and fabulous sightings, ET craft in the sky. Very positive, beautiful energy up there.
Thank you, Angelica, for reminding me about that. So yeah, definitely a lot of beautiful energies there. That's what I've always experienced myself. So whatever influence the Draconians and the Greys had, I think it was very, very limited. So that brings this Q&A to a close. So I want to thank you for being a part of this. I'm very glad we all joined this Earth mission together, and we really have exciting times ahead, and so I look forward to being part of that with you. So thank you, and aloha.
You have been listening to Exopolitics today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.